Want to nail engineering manager interviews at Mang and other top-tier companies? You can with USA's #1 tech interview prep platform. We have 300 plus SMEs and instructors from top-tier tech companies to help you land your dream job. We've helped thousands of engineers make their way into Mang. You could be next. To learn more, register for our free webinar.
So is this your first interview by any chance?
Oh no, I had maybe 2 or 3 previously.
Okay. All right. Let's see here. Yeah, so is this your first front-end interview by any chance? Or Android interview?
No, I've had I forgot to send over my resume, so sorry about that. Yeah, so just some brief background. I've been an Android engineer now for like 6 years. Currently a senior Android engineer.
Awesome. Is that 6 total years of experience or just 6 years of experience in Android?
In total.
Okay, got it. Yeah, so the format of this interview is pretty much the same as other types of interviews. You've actually given your intro, so I'll just give my intro right now. And after the intro, we'll spend about 30-40 minutes around some questions around Android. And we'll have some time at the end for feedback and any questions you might have for myself. Cool. So for myself, I've got about 9 years of experience. I do mainly Android work nowadays for the search team. I've done some other technologies in my career. I've done some full stack work early on, but I really don't mention that because it was like outdated technology and it's not probably not relevant anymore. I've got some other front end experience, but nowadays it's mainly just mobile stuff. I've done some iOS work, but yeah, just as of more recently, it's really just been Android.
Awesome.
Cool. Yeah. So I guess without further ado, we could just probably dive right into the question and just go ahead and get started around that.
Yeah, sounds great.
Did you have access to the CodeBump link for like Android or front end interviews? Like, if you want to use something else, I'm totally okay with it. Just because, like, it's not as coding heavy since it's more. I mean, it really depends on the question, but for usually these types of questions for Android or front end, I don't. It's not really as coding heavy. So if you have a preference, what it could even be your like notebook and a pencil. You just have to like communicate what you're saying.
No, this is fine. We can use this.
Okay, cool. All right, let's see. We're doing pretty good with time here. All right, so first thing, did you want to stick with Python?
Oh no, yeah. Let's just change it. No, we'll just do Java for now.
Okay, cool. And you don't have to do this part. But sharing your screen is optional. It can help. It can help when you look back at these VODs, see how your like pacing and rhythm is with the interview.
That's a good idea.
Okay, cool. So for today's Android question, I'm going to ask if you can design a simple app. It's going to include a login screen with a few buttons here, or a few number of fields. We'll have a username, password field, as well as a login button. And for our second page, we'll have, which will be our home page. It'll include an editable field where you can query images of a user, and you can assume these images have been pre-saved for the particular user, and they could just kind of query their own images. So it'll be an editable field, also a list or grid of images. And for as far as APIs are concerned, I usually involve APIs with like folks that have at least 5 years of experience.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming you're probably more or less familiar with APIs and using them in
Yep.
Android. Okay. For APIs, we'll have just a login API, which will take in a username and password, and also a second API for images, which will include a token, as well as a query. And this will return a list of image URLs. And then for the first one, it will return a token. Sorry, skip that. Yeah, so my first general question is for a project like this, how would you approach it?
Yeah, just really quickly before we deep dive into it.
Mhm.
So this is going to be more of a architecture with some coding involved question, right?
Yeah, it could include some level of coding,
Oh, okay.
but
So
yeah, definitely more on the architectural side and high level architect. We'll get low level with the architecture, but yeah, does that answer your question?
yeah, it does. Thank you. All right, cool. So as we begin, right? So I just have some requirements, right? So this login screen, right? For the username, right? We're gonna should there be any character limits based on the input for username or password?
Yeah, good question. We'll limit it to like for username, we'll say at most 10 characters, and for password, we'll say up to 36.
36. All right, awesome. So that being said, within those 36 characters for password, are we going to be allowing any special characters such as like, percent, question mark, or anything of that sort?
We, yes, you could do special characters for password.
Okay, awesome. So, before we move on there, and as you mentioned, right, so we are gonna have a username, a password field, and then a login button. So, like, just like a rough, mock of the app, right, would just be three fields. This is so, um, so yeah, just drawing a brief overview of that screen, right? We're gonna have uh pretty simple, right? Just username field, edit text, password edit text, and then just a login button
Mhm.
itself. And so, okay, so now that we got that situated, right? Let's actually talk a little bit more in depth about our token, right? So right now our API for login, right? It
Mhm.
simply just returns a token, right? How long is it valid for? And how does it like refresh, right? In that case, do we log them out, or is this API also going to provide some information such as a refresh token?
Yeah, yeah, you can assume the token lasts for 2 days.
Okay, tokens for 2 days, and then after those 2 days, uh,
Oh,
uh,
and you could also assume the API has a separate field for a refresh token.
okay. Okay, awesome. And refresh token, that's great. So, okay, cool. So, because we'll be getting the token and the refresh token, right? So those will be the two elements that we'll be storing onto the device, right? I'm assuming, when the user closes the app and reopens the app, right? You want them to just be logged in automatically and just start using the app, right?
Yeah, that would be a good feature.
Yep. So so we'll be storing that token and refresh token. And in this and because we know it's only going to be valid for 2 days, right? We could also store a timestamp for the original token. That being because like it doesn't make sense. Like if 3 days later you open the app, we have an old token, we hit it, and then we realize it's failed, then we have to, get the refresh one, right? So all right, awesome. Now that we got that
So
sorted.
would the client in that case, would the code refer to the timestamp to determine whether it could use the token?
Yeah, exactly. So like from that timestamp, we'll be able to determine if it's been like 48 hours, right?
Mhm.
If it has been 48 hours, don't even bother using it, just use the refresh token API.
Mhm.
So that should also be
What about if the client like changes the device time on their device?
okay, yeah, that's fair. I feel like that's a real edge case that won't be too common because anyways what's going to happen anyways is they're just going to utilize that refresh token, right? I don't
Okay.
think yeah. um does that
Okay.
work?
Uh, I it's the yeah. I mean that could work. The code, it'll probably just fail, and in the in case if it does fail, I guess what would happen if the token call does fail?
So it's called token call does fail, right?
Yeah. So like, let's say I modified the device time,
Yeah.
and then like the code tries to read it, and it sees that, I don't know, it's past the date. Well, if it's past the date, what would happen then? Or if it's, let's say we trick the code into thinking it's before the date. So like, let's say it's actually expired, but I modify it to make the code think it hasn't expired. Then it would try to use an invalid token, which will cause the failure.
So yeah, so in that case, right, what I was thinking of was, it doesn't matter if you go back in time or forward in time, right? Pretty much it would just like the amount remaining would need to exist within the range of 48 hours, right? And if that no longer exists, if it no longer meets that requirement, what's going to happen is we're just going to directly just use the refresh token. So using the refresh token, right, we should have another API for really refreshing, right? So let's say we have a login,
Mhm.
refresh, and then we pass in some refresh, right?
The
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, the range of 48 hours, it's still going to be to check the range for 48 hours. The
Yeah.
code would still have to take into account the current device time, right? So it's still going to have to consult the system device time, wouldn't it?
Okay, yeah, that's true. So the other way we could get around this is in our API, right? We could be uh no, well, I was gonna suggest, right? I don't know if this is a great idea, right?
Mhm.
Um a part of our we have a bootstrapping service, right? Where you know um it sends us a timestamp or like some ID to reflect um the the token, whether or not the token is valid.
Okay.
um and we just go off that information too, right? So
Right. A validation token API or something.
so yeah, so in that case, let's just really quick validation, right? Okay, so So we can erase this now. So in that case, if the validation fails, right, then we'll just we'll use the refresh endpoint to refresh, and then we'll carry on as usual.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, that sounds good.
So I think that's pretty good for the terms of the login screen, right? So let's just talk a little bit more about the homepage, right?
Oh, actually, let's drill in a little bit around the login page a little more.
All right.
If you don't mind. Yeah. So for the packaging, for like the package structure of this app,
Yeah.
how would you organize this app in terms of packaging, direct folder structure?
Yep. I just realized, sorry, I wasn't sharing my whole screen. I was only sharing one of the tabs. I was writing down on the other one. Sorry about that. Yeah. So to answer your question,
Oh,
right?
it showed you switching tabs, so it kind of like worked out. But this worked. This is even better, of course. This view.
Okay. Awesome. Uh, yeah. So in that case, to answer your question about the packaging, so um, my question to that is, are you saying, how are we going to architect this thing? Like, are we going to use MVVM architecture, and how we're going to be placing it in the code as
Mhm.
such?
Oh yeah, not exactly. But you could, if your folder structure is going to be based on an architecture, you can feel free to answer it that way as well.
Uh,
But not necessarily like what architecture you're using. But sometimes the architecture does drive the folder structure.
mhm.
So I understand if you have to like mesh the answer. Um, but yeah, like in general, how would you, given like the requirements so far, and what you know about this app, how would you just, for example, the login page,
Yeah. Okay.
how would you start defining that feature in terms of the package?
Yeah, let's just call it combat test, right, to begin with. And then the way that it would just break out to would be into several parts, right? So the first being, get back here. First being the model, right? That's where we're going to be storing any models that we need to that we'll be using in this app, right? After that, what would we have is a networking layer for all our networking, and then we'll break it down into our UI, and then within our UI, that's where we'll retain um, the logic for handling the UI, right? So within these packaging, right, we could then break it out into um, the flow of how the code is actually going to work, right? So we're going to have 2, 3. So the way that it's going to kind of work, and let's say, yeah, okay. Yeah, okay, this works. So the way you're going to have it work is essentially we're going to have a login repository. And this login repository is going to be a part of the code, which is going to be responsible for handling the networking requests for logging in, right? So this would be the login method, right? The refresh token method if needed, and yeah, right.
Mhm.
And then right here, this would be our login view model, right? Uh, And within this view model, right, we're gonna have yeah, within this view model, right, we're gonna conduct all the business logic, but additionally, what else is gonna happen in this? The view model itself is also gonna manage the state, right? So the view state, right? So we're gonna have a sealed view state class, and within that, right, we're gonna have the different states they have, right, for the login page. So we could have, loading, failed, and then success, right? And then also we could also, put input errors in the case where they entered nothing, right? Yeah, so as I was saying, right, so within this login view model, right, we would just have a simple method, right, called login, where they would pass in their username and password, right? So username and password, whatever, it's fine. I won't focus on that. Username and password, username and password, and
Yeah,
this
you
username
could
and
use pass for short if it bothers you. You could always use like pass for short. I'll understand what you're.
yeah,
meaning.
yeah. So sorry. Yeah, so and the way that this login method would essentially work, right? This method would be running in the background, and its sole responsibility would be communicate to the login repository to get the necessary tokens for us to proceed, right? So
Mhm.
it shows a relationship that way, and the relation and so it communicates this way, and then the data comes back this way onto it, and then based on the response that's returned from login repository, right, then we could reflect that within one of our view states, right? In the case like where we get a null or we get like a 500, right, we will then be able to reflect that, right, via some like live data that we have. Oops.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So you mentioned login view model is MVVM what you're uh, planning to implement here.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. And so the login repository, it has a login method. What is it returning exactly to the login view model?
Yeah. So this login. So okay. So yeah, I messed up. Okay, what I forgot to create was the the model, right? The model that's going to be
Sure.
responsible for saving that information, right? So what's going to happen is this login method, right, is just going to be a regular void method, right? Which fragment activity is going to be responsible for calling, right? And this login method, because it's going to be running on some separate thread because it is making a background call to the network request, right? It'll be conducting it via like coroutines or something, right? So yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I feel like I'm not answering your question. Yeah, sorry.
Oh no, that's fine. Yeah, that does somewhat answer it. Your token model, how does it look like? What information is included in the token model?
Yeah, in this case, right, we'll have a token, a string, right, and then a refresh token. And then let's just say there's some like ID to honest. Well, that's kind of redundant. The token itself is an ID, right?
Sure. Yeah, you could assume it's unique. I mean, so is there any reason like the view model needs to know like either the token or refresh token?
No, it doesn't. The what's being well, it would need to know if if there is a token that already exists, right? No, I'm sorry, no, it doesn't. The whole purpose of the login view model is not to return anything, right? It's right now it's just going to be just a method, right? So the way that that way that that data is going to be communicated back is just through some observable, right?
Sure. But like, I'm talking about the login repository, not the view model.
Okay, yeah. So the login repository is just returning the token model. It doesn't need to know what the token model is. It's doing is, it's fetching the API, right?
Right.
And then, once it gets the response back, right? It's just mapping that response to a model.
Right. Okay. But the login view model, does it really care about like the token or refresh token?
No, not at this point. I'm in this case, this is maybe a requirement that I should have mentioned earlier, right?
Mhm.
If they're already logged in, right? Um, are we handling that logic elsewhere, right? We are not necessarily, because if they already have some token model, right, it kind of doesn't make sense for us to inflate the login view
Mhm.
to kind of, um, I mean, yeah, somewhat we can, right? Or do we want are you to inflate the login view if there's a token and we want them to just go the traditional auth flow?
Sure. Right. The kind of like an auto login.
Mhm.
Um,
Okay, yeah. No, sorry, go ahead.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, it just brings up an interesting question. Like, does the login view model really ever need to know about a token? Right. Do you think it,
Well,
what do you think? Yeah.
yeah, so in that case where, like, hey, we do want to log in again, right? And have that
Mhm.
auto flow kind of, right? We
Right.
would need an additional method. Well, we could have additional method just called login, and then it could take in a token, right? A nullable string.
Mhm.
And then what's going to happen within this login token method, right? It's just going to check if token not equal null, right? Then, uh, you know, repo login with token, right? Whatever.
Mhm.
Uh, assuming that I create another login method, right? Which could take in a token. Otherwise, right? Else, use state uh, default, right? And default being just the normal state of how this screen is supposed to look, right?
Okay.
And then from there, right, if the user were to enter information and press enter, right, it would call
Mhm.
the second login method, right, with username and password. And then, it would pass the information onto the login repository, gets a token model. And with a token model, right, once we finally had that, we were able to finally percolate that up to,
Uh, okay. So let's slow down just a bit. Uh, yeah. Before we get any further down that road, let's take a look at this method here. So we've got a login that accepts a token string. So does this imply that the UI component, whether it's an activity or a fragment using the view model, is that expected? Is the caller expected to pass the token?
yes. And the reason why I was actually going to get to it later, but the
Mhm.
thing is, so we'll be using to store the actual token and refresh token, right? Using something like Room or like some database is it's extreme overkill. And then
Mhm.
also to add an extra layer of security, right? I was gonna use some encrypted share preferences, right?
Mhm.
With the use of that, we'll be able to securely store that data, and we'll be able to avoid the overhead of Roam database or something of that sort. And the reason why I was gonna have it be sent in, right? encrypted shared preferences requires the context, right? And my login view model and my repository, I'm trying to keep that agnostic from any Android code. So I was actually gonna like do the part and do the saving and the getting of the token from the fragment itself.
Okay. I mean, the login view model, it's inherently using like code from Android, right? Like the live data concept. And I guess,
Mhm.
are you saying just like you're trying to prevent as many platform code in the view model as possible?
Uh, Somewhat in regards to like unit testing, right? Um, when you're unit testing, you can't really, unless you're using like Roboto or some other third-party framework, right?
Right, right.
You can't really unit test. So that's why, in my mind, right, I was just
Mhm.
trying to avoid the use of context, and um, I was just, yeah, it was just in my mind, just avoid the use of context in your view model. So therefore, the place you would have your context would be your fragment.
Got it. Okay. Now, if we do get the token from the fragment or activity, that's going to be, it can be uh, kind of timely to get that token since now we're interacting with the disk to get the token, right?
Mhm.
So like, how would we handle that since disk operations could have uh, high latency as well?
Sorry, one,
Yeah.
sorry, one. Uh, yeah, sorry about that. You were saying,
Mhm.
yeah, the getting the disk operation can be costly.
Yeah, like it's probably not going to be as high as the network latency, but there's some level of latency with disk operations.
Hmm.
And if we do it on the UI thread, it could
Yep.
uh, not be a great thing. So how do we
Yeah,
handle? Mhm.
yeah, that's true. But the thing is with um, shared preferences, I think the latency is fairly quick, right? And we really don't. There really is no performance benefit of us like trying to run fetch that on a separate thread, right?
Mhm.
Um, unless if we really want to get in the weeds of it, right, within our application class, right, we could load we could do um the read there and save it to a token model singleton somehow, right? And then from there, so as soon as we get to this point, right, the fragment itself, right, there's no latency.
Well, can you explain what you mean by loaded in the application class?
Yeah, so in the application class, as you know, it's that class which expands, which extends application,
Mhm.
and where this is where all code is first instantiated and read for an Android app, right? So let's just call it what is this called? Let's just call it test application, and in there, right, within our on create method here, right, we'll just because all of this is like running in the background already itself, right? We could use this part. In this part, we can then read check if token exists, and if token exists, right, set the singleton.
Okay. So since like this class runs at startup, wouldn't the startup time take a hit in that case?
Yes, that is true, but the thing is, it's maybe I'm oversimplifying
Uh-huh.
it. um but
Um, yeah, go ahead.
oh yeah, I would say maybe I'm just oversimplifying it, like, reading from shared preference, because I'm just thinking from a logical, like, hey, when you're actually implementing it, that read is in like I feel like it's inconsequential, but in that case, we can essentially, if we do want, we can put on a separate thread, right, in our fragment, in which would then fetch from our share preferences, and then then attempt to log in.
Okay. All right. Let's shift gears to back to the login. Oh, it's going up and down. Okay, there we go. All right. So okay, otherwise you'll return view state default. So in terms of login, okay, so it'll still return the token model, and the view model will just give back a view state back to the fragment. And if it does fail, and we have to show like an error dialog or something, would anything happen if like we go, I don't know, the user, they get tired of the loading screen, so they go back to the Android homepage? Yeah, like how would that interaction work out between the live data and the fragment in case of a failure while the user shifts to the Android home screen?
Yeah. Because that data is because our view models live data. I'm sorry, take a step back. Because we're using view models, right? View models are lifecycle aware, right?
Mhm.
So, and also because we're using including the implementation of coroutines, right? So the coroutine scope itself, view model launch, right? Well, view model scope itself would also be lifecycle aware, so it'd be able to, pause that request, right? So that way, when the user shifts to the home page, right, that the request stops, and it doesn't attempt to relay that information back to the app, right? So the fragment. So in the case where the user were to open up the app again, right, it says so the fragment's going to be reinstantiated, so it's going to recreate itself again. It will just go through the process of again trying to fetch the token, and then yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right, cool. So yeah, can you explain some of the reasons why you're using MVVM for the project?
Yeah, so one of the main reasons I'm using it so far, as mentioned, is because it's lifecycle aware. It uh, uh, prevents managing that overhead of managing the lifecycle. That also it handles configuration changes as well, right? So if you were to turn this phone sideways, right, the view model is retained, and we can have a logic within our methods to make sure, hey, just get the you don't have to do everything again, just observe what the live data already has, right? Yeah, and then the third reason is the separation of concerns principle. It really separates the responsibility of each class really well.
Okay, and why is separation of concerns like an important thing?
Yeah, so separations of concerns is a really important thing. One in regards to one in regards to the focus of the code, right? What that code really is going to be responsible for, right? And it's going to be what is going to be responsible for. So like if you're going to make changes, right, you'll only be making let's say you have to add a new API, right? Or you need to update the login API, right?
Mhm.
Well, you'll only be making those changes in the login repository because that's the information where we're handling all our, networking stuff, right?
Yeah.
And then, the second reason is also just, you know, yeah, I don't know actually.
No, it's okay. I mean, that's what this is. This is for.
Yeah,
This is all for mock
yeah.
interview. Okay. Cool. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about. Okay. So we've got a login repository class. Which package is this going under? Where would this file go under?
Yeah, so that would just go under networking.
Networking. Okay. If this like project was to like scale bigger, uh, for example, we might have more networking pieces
Mm-hmm.
for homepage. If we had a sign up flow
Yep.
and right, the sky's the limit as far as how big this networking package can grow depending on how big the app gets.
Mm-hmm.
How would we like solve for something like that if the network package starts to get big?
Yeah, so in that regards, I'm thinking, sub packages, for each of the individual, networking services that we're going to write. But like that also in return, um, also can result in a really large package size, right?
Mhm.
So what we could do, well, because the project, not at the current moment, right? It's not set up that way, but if we were to invest the time, we could actually start building out networking into modules, right? Android modules, and then have uh, those modules represent, a sole um, responsibility. So that way it's clear to the developers working on it.
Sure. I guess we'll skip the modules part since, I mean, sure, I suppose we could do that. But like even with aside from modules, the sub package approach would that really solve it, right? Since it would just be sub packaging within the networking package. But
Yeah, it really wouldn't solve it.
okay, I just want to make sure I understood what you're saying. Right.
Yeah, yeah, I don't think it would really solve it because all you're doing is you're just adding levels to the problem, right?
Right. Okay.
Layers. So, um, what really
Uh-huh.
would need to happen is we would really need to change our folder structure of how we actually do things, right? One
Mhm.
way we could change our folder structure is, have the packages be done by, each screen, right? So we have contest.login, right?
Mhm.
And then these will be the subsequent, packages within that, which would then, say, hey, these are all the related classes for this type here.
Yeah.
That
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, I was also gonna say a negative, but yeah.
Yeah. Sure. What would be a negative?
Yeah, so the negative of that approach, it makes one, it could make reusability and extending a bit more unclear, right, to the person.
Mhm.
Um, they would have to realize, oh, this is inside this package, but I need to do this work in this package. How do I then, let's say if it was like protected, right? Let's say the class was protected and you want to inherit it from it, right? So then how would you be able to do that, right? Oh, you would have to change it to public, yada, 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 so on and so on, right? So that could be one of the negatives of that approach, but yeah.
Okay. Um, yeah, sure. So let's probably let's transition to feedback and then any questions you might have for myself after the feedback. Um, yeah, does that sound good?
Oh yeah, sounds great.
Okay, cool. So overall, I thought, yeah, the interview was It went decent. Some parts you did really good. Other parts there's some improvements. Excuse me.
Mhm.
So the first, let's see where to start. So I liked how you started asking for requirements at the beginning. You didn't just jump in. That's obviously the first thing I look for. If folks just start jumping in, it's kind of a red flag. So I liked how you didn't do that. And then afterwards, I liked how you clarified requirements. I know it seems like an IK for, especially for front end interviews, which this is pretty much kind of one thing they do that I kind of like, is they ask for functional and non-functional requirements. In all honesty, I thought the way you ask requirements, like it's okay with me. I don't necessarily, especially with folks with higher years of experience, I would say you're still kind of like early mid part, but especially with folks with like mid to high, I'm not too worried about like non-functional requirements, which is stuff like do we plan to support tablets, or what versions of Android, for example. Those would be like non-functional. You asked me more along the sides of like functional requirements, which was just fine for me. Now, I liked how you broke it up into the type of architectures. You at least started to bring that up, which was great. It let me know that you kind of had that in mind early on, which was a good signal. And yeah, let's start talking about like stuff that can use some work, and you could probably just build on. The first one is kind of a nitpick. Like I'm not. It's one of those things where you can get yourself in a hole if it just starts going the wrong way. Like I wasn't too worried about this device time stuff. Like to me, it's not like a make or break thing. It could be something that could be the deciding. It could be like a swing factor, whether like you're very close to passing or not passing. Then it's like, well, let's look at the smaller details, and that's where this stuff can bite you. So in general, like using device time on client side is kind of a code smell. It's usually code smell because of the fact that it's user controlled. The user can control it, and that's where client code itself can start to break down. And I mean, that's really just it. It's just that. That's why I view it more of a nitpick than like, it's like, oh, the whole interview is voided because of that. I wouldn't, say that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, I was trying to like see, and who knows, maybe you did find some, great solution no one knows out there. So I asked, like, how would you solve that? Luckily, we ended up getting to a point where you mentioned validating the API token as like an alternative to like an alternative route, which is good. There's I'm familiar with that practice being out there, kind of an industry practice. So you kind of got yourself out of that hole with that approach, and that if it works, it works. So, and then afterwards, let's see here, we got yes, token abstraction. This part I thought could use some improvement. So in login repository, the fact that so now we're kind of getting into like the architecture itself. So in this portion, what I'm really looking for is like your sense of the architecture, how you view the architecture, and everything matters. In the context of an interview. So just a hand, like, or not just a hand, just a heads up. Like when saying stuff like, if we're going to get into the weeds, I don't know if you want to say that because that's the point. Yeah, that's the point of the interview. And I wanted to let you know this now because, you want to know this you want to keep that in your head in case, you go out there, you might say to the wrong interviewer who might like, I don't know, take offense or something and just be like, what? I don't know. I've had some experiences with interviewers where I try to laugh and crack a joke, and it just, they did not seem amused at all. So just some just sharing some experience there. So when you didn't really say it at this part, but the token view model, the login view model, knowing about the token model, I don't think it really ever needs to know about the token model. Your whole repository layer can abstract the token concept completely, as far as I'm concerned. Right, like there's really, for example, if you handle caching, the whole caching layer, which usually lives alongside the repository layer, when you're including all these various like classes in your networking package, you can consult that caching layer to see if there's a token there when you're performing any call on a repository. Right. So for example, and I would even recommend having a separate repository just for tokens, but like a token repository, because you're going to get other repositories that come to life down the road for these apps. Like for example, your homepage, right? You can have maybe a homepage repository. It probably doesn't want a login repository just to get the token model. And there could be X number of features which might not really care about a login repository, since the login repository sounds more tied to the login page. And yeah, it's just little things like that. It might want like a token repository just to grab the token and then go forward. And that whole repository and caching layer could abstract the whole token concept. Where at the core, you basically do what you talked about. Do I have a token? Is it valid? Let me use it. Do I have a token? It's not valid? Then let me refresh it, get a valid one, and like basically the token repo just hand abstracts all that logic and produces a good token for its callers. Something like that. So that itself kind of gave me insight into like how well like the whole the role of a repository inside of MVVM. I did like how you mentioned unit testing for login view model, and how you made it a point that you wanted to prevent the context from coming into the login view model. I think the context, I believe the way they set up a login view model, I mean, I should know this, I've worked there, but the way they set it up, I don't extensively use this stuff, but I'm very familiar with it. I think you could still test the view models even with the context. But I still like how you made it a point that you wanted to make the classes platform agnostic as you can. I think that's a good principle. It's mentioned a lot. If you ever read Clean Architecture, the solid principles. So I just kind of in support of that, which the Android 5 architecture is based on. It's actually based on some of those rules from solid and clean architecture. I like that was a really good signal. I'm just going through some notes here. Oh yeah, the shared prefs. Yeah, so I think this is when we're kind of getting into like, how would we, who is caching the token, who's consulting the token. Like I mentioned earlier, that stuff I feel like could really be abstracted by the repository layer. So like for the fragment or activity to grab something from the shared prefs directly, it feels like a code smell. It would have helped if you maybe, well, the best answer in my opinion is it just doesn't. It just doesn't, especially for a token. But if you kind of like needed something to, like, what I recommend is if you find yourself like kind of questioning like, oh crap, I think the interviewer doesn't buy my solution. Like, what do I do here? Like one bailout plan I usually have is just going back to solid and thinking about general class abstraction. So like in this case, we could, if you really wanted to make it work, you could abstract that responsibility of grabbing a token, I guess, like in a different class, that returns like a future or like an RX job. I don't know. I don't use RX job anymore, but basically some sort of asynchronous callback that the UI can use. And technically, you could have the UI show a spinner or something while it does that disk IO. That isn't really like a popular practice, so probably I wouldn't go as far as a loading spinner, but the point is that if you do disk IO work on a UI thread, that's probably not going to set well in an interview setting for sure. They're going to want some sort of like, how would you work around that? Definitely not the application on create approach, because the startup time matters a lot for apps, as you might know. And if you can't avoid that altogether, like even avoid that discussion, just don't even go there if they don't want to, unless they explicitly like go there and they want to know your thoughts. It's just someplace. The test app on create, you want to make it as light as possible because we want that startup time to be nice. Okay. I like how you mentioned how you would handle the failure dialogue. Although there's one point, and I've pulled this up before. I'll see if I could pull it up for you. But you mentioned how, like, for a failure dialogue, when we jump back into the app, it is lifecycle aware. The way it's listening for the live data, but if it's on an existing fragment that doesn't recreate, it'll emit the response that it saved when it was away. So I think that's kind of a bonus point if you can share that. But sure, if it does destroy the fragment and a new one creates, then it would just go down with a new call. Okay, let's talk a little bit about packaging. This was pretty interesting because we kind of talked about like the problems with your initial package structure, and then you gave some alternatives. Towards the end of the interview, you kind of actually hit this. You definitely hit the spot in terms of like what I believe would have solved the packaging issue. You didn't really say the name, but you kind of hinted at the technique, which is feature-based packaging. But yes, having like a login feature, which has its own model networking UI, and then a homepage one. It's really a great way to break down apps, and it's getting. I think it's still trending currently with the climate of how things are done. It's a very good practice, and that does solve a lot of the problems that we were talking about, package bloating, stuff like that. And you started to mention like the reusability could be bad, which it could be depending on what you put in. If you're putting shared code inside of a feature package, then reusability could be a problem, sure. But usually inside of with feature-based packaging, you could have shared code, specifically like a shared package or something, where the shared code belong to. For example, token repository would most likely be a shared component that would live inside of a shared package used by other features, and any other utility functions you could think of that could be leveraged by other features. So if you organize it properly, I don't think reusability could be a problem, at least not like on a big scale. Reusability could be a problem, sure, at some point for any app. But if you organize it properly, it should be a comfortable approach, especially for like simple apps like the one we're talking about here. Yeah, so when we started talking about why MVVM, I liked your answers about lifecycle aware, separation of concerns. When we started breaking up separation of concerns, other points you could have mentioned was it prevents class bloating, testability increases, or it makes it easier for sure. you mentioned responsibility, and I think that was kind of where you started to. It felt like you were drifting off a little bit when you were answering that, which is fine. You know, you want to get this over with here and be prepared in the real thing. So yeah, like I think you would have gone there if you know. I think you're aware of it. You know, stuff like testability. You gave me enough impression where, yeah, it seemed like you're aware of these things, or it doesn't sound foreign to you. Yeah, that's all for my notes.
All right, awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Well, one of my first questions was, did you feel like I was cutting you off a lot and over speaking and or like kind of just ignoring what you were saying? So if I was doing that, I apologize. I was just eager, so hopefully it didn't come off as arrogant or something of that sort.
No, not at all. I thought you were fine. I've seen worse, and it's like, I mean, not that I've seen worse, as in you're even on that scale. To be honest, I really don't think you were on that scale. I could tell you were eager. You know, I could sense the enthusiasm. So when I see that, I don't. I try my best to distinguish between arrogance and enthusiasm. And to me, I really didn't feel any arrogance. It was more about, I could see like you were eager to answer questions. And I could tell you were trying to like retract to let me talk. So that's usually a sign of just eagerness, like you said. So I didn't think you were hurt. No.
All right, cool. I just want to make sure, I wasn't like being rude. Yeah, and then, more or less, we had two screens that we had to go through. Within this like 40-minute period, we were only able to get through the login page. That's okay, because I feel like, we really got into a much lengthier conversation than I expected. Yeah.
So that's totally fine. That's totally fine. On my end, I try to make these. I mean, at face value, this question might look easy, especially if you have a lot of industry experience. But that's kind of the point, right? Like any question, it looks like that. I'm trying to make these questions flexible enough to account for early engineers, mid, and seniors. So just because you didn't get through the whole thing doesn't mean you didn't pass or something, or like it's a hard fail, like, oh, we didn't even get through everything. Like that's really not it. The point is how far can we get through, or I'm sorry, the point isn't exactly how far we can get. That we do, I take that into account somewhat. For example, with your years of experience, which does matter, years of experience does matter, because given your years of experience, it means you're probably coming in at a certain level, which I have to keep in mind. So I'm kind of thinking about what level I'm trying you for. And it's like, okay, well, we should definitely get into the nick of the details for login screen at least, which we did, so that was kind of a good sign. But for example, if we got stuck in requirements, like let's say, I don't know, you couldn't understand, like if you really couldn't understand how data state works with fragments, and we started getting bottlenecked on that, that could be a problem. But to answer your question, that doesn't really matter so much.
All right. Okay, awesome. I guess another one of my questions, I just had it. Oh yeah, when we're talking about the shared preference stuff, right? The shared preference stuff, right? The conversation that we're having back and forth. Did it more or less seem dismissive, or because I at a certain point I wasn't trying to be dismissive, but I was just trying to move things along. I was like, because I felt like my argument was getting pretty thin at that point.
Right.
Same thing with the reading and writing from the share. Oh, that's the share preference stuff. Yeah. Did you feel like that really came across?
I would say like probably let the interviewer control the pacing, right? Like if you feel like your argument's getting thin, but you might be surprised, maybe your answer isn't getting as thin as you think, right? Like towards the end of the interview, you actually, your tone actually sounded similar to the same preference one. I mean, you tell me if I'm right. I don't want to read into your tone and stuff, but it's you when you mentioned like we could break it up into login, and that was actually the answer. It was actually the answer. So I would say like leave the pacing to the interviewer, because if they're drilling in, it could be a good thing. It could mean that you're actually coming closer to the answer than you realize. And yeah, so but in the preference case, when you mentioned some of the solutions for the preference, I needed to see the signal for myself. Like, is this a good or bad signal? So I had to drill into it to try to determine that. The same way I did it for the packaging, that turned out to be a pretty good signal. Like, okay, you have a good sense of how that works. So for preference, it was pretty much the same thing. I drilled into it a little bit to see like where this heads, and that didn't turn out so well, since it led to kind of like beyond create code. So does that help answer your question? Because your question was actually,
No, yeah, definitely.
Okay.
I really appreciate the feedback and, doing this exercise with you. I think it was super helpful. So thanks again.
Yeah, no problem. Good luck with the rest of your interviews, and yeah, great stuff.
All right, take care.
Okay, take care.